Fans of heavy metal rejoice, the full release of Warriors of Chaos for Warhammer The Old World is imminent. Games Workshop is starting the pre-order for the old 6th edition Warriors of Chaos sculpts starting August 31st, so if you're going to dive into worshipping the Chaos Gods, now is a great time to do it. However, choosing an army to play in a miniature game, any miniature game, is actually quite a big commitment. Especially if you're playing for Warhammer, the sculpts are expensive. There is a big monetary investment here, but it also takes a lot of time to paint them up. So for your own sake, it's imperative that when you choose an army, you choose something you're going to really enjoy. In this video, I'm going to walk through everything you need to know about the Warriors of Chaos, both what I think is good, both what I think is bad, and hopefully it can help you make an informed decision. So let's dive right in, starting with changes to their lore. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that if you're starting an army for the old world, you're not exactly a newbie to the Warhammer lore. It's unfortunately a relatively niche game, and I'm guessing if you're going into this, you either have a background in previous versions of Warhammer Fantasy, or in Total War, or reading the books. So I'm not going to rehash the entire history of these Viking warriors who've been roided up by chaos gods. I'm just going to talk about how it's different in the old world versus if you're used to the old editions of Warhammer Fantasy or the Total War games. In previous editions of Warhammer Fantasy tabletop game, or if you're dealing with Creative Assembly's Total War Masterpiece, you're dealing with a time period where chaos, and thus the Warriors of Chaos, are at their peak. Games Workshop has described chaos as something that ebbs and flows over time, and this game takes place definitely during one of those low points for chaos. The current Everchosen is objectively a failure, and the next Everchosen, Azavar Kul, is still just a warlord in the north. He may be powerful, but he's just a background character right now, according to GW. If the setting moves forward in any significant way, we will probably get a lot of cool lore information and hopefully narrative events around the rise of Azavar Kul. However, if the setting stays static and the Warriors of Chaos have no Everchosen to rally behind, rather than being this world-defining threat, instead they will mostly be lore-wise large raiding parties at most. This also means that per GW, in this setting, chaos is going to be less defined. Rather than split up into 4 defined gods with very defined boons and warriors, you're going to see more of a chaos undivided feel, and the religion is going to be based more on metaphor rather than calling, Zench, he'll be the crow, stuff like that. And personally, I think that's better. I think there is a lot more room for role-playing your own warband within that context, but if you want to be the big bad of the setting, it's very possible chaos doesn't end up that way if the setting stays static. I have no insider knowledge of what GW is going to do one way or the other. I think it's reasonable to assume that there will be a narrative of some kind, just because when GW posts articles about the old world, they bring up the word narrative a lot. They definitely have plans and stories to tell, but whether that moves the setting forward to the point where Azavar Kul comes to power and chaos becomes more defined, or if we tell stories stuck in this one time period or even going back further, is yet to be seen. One thing I can promise you though is that chaos, and thus Warriors of Chaos, are very important to the Warhammer IP, regardless of it's their fantasy, 40k, or Strange Age of Sigmar setting. If you do choose to start a Warriors of Chaos army, you could be pretty safe in the knowledge that no matter what, they will get attention in storylines, narrative books, models, and likely rules. They are not going to be an ignored faction by any stretch of the imagination. More important to the lore, and perhaps for most people the most important part about picking a Warhammer army itself, are the models. How did they look on the tabletop? How available are they? How expensive are they? And in these aspects, the Warriors of Chaos are in a very interesting place. I suppose the first thing worth mentioning is not every Warriors of Chaos unit from the old Warhammer Fantasy editions have made it into this new setting. This is a bit annoying, to be honest, as GW stated before the system launched that people would be able to bring in their old armies from the old settings into this new one. However, Chaos is missing some of their end time units and some of their other units like, War Shrines, Hell Crushers, Putrid Blight Kings, etc. There is actually a fairly substantial list of Chaos units that are not going to be in the old world. And the justification of this, of course, is that Chaos is not resurgent right now. And so these big, crazy, God-infused units, I guess, aren't relevant to the setting. Of course, the actual reason is all of these kits are still sold for Age of Sigmar, and for whatever reason, Games Workshop doesn't want to double dip and sell one kit for two different systems, so these are the cards we're dealt. But if you already have an army for one of these older editions and have spent so many hours on painting these models, you might not find that answer satisfactory. The good news is most of these models can be proxied as other things. Your Blight Kings, for example, can make great Chaos Ogres, especially if you give them the Mark of Nurgle. Other units like the War Shrines, you might not have an easy time doing that, as the shrines themselves are so big, it's hard to think what they could proxy in your new army. And that is the one true negative Warriors of Chaos have when it comes to their physical models. Everything else is actually really great about Warriors of Chaos. For starters, they are an elite army, which means you're not going to have a huge model count on the tabletop unless you do something like a Norska army. I'll talk about that a bit more later. Otherwise, you're going to have some smaller elite units, which means they're going to be one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, supported army to put on the tabletop. They're also going to take a lot less time to paint. However, what I really love about the Warriors of Chaos is you have so many options for models. Even if you just look at official models, there's plenty of third-party options. But if you're just looking to run an official GW army, you're going to have so many different options to run and for kitbashing that it's going to be an opportunity to be insanely creative. As you probably are already aware, GW are bringing back the old 6th edition sculpts of the Warriors of Chaos, and they're going to sell those exclusively for the old world. However, Warriors of Chaos still exist in their new setting, Age of Sigmar, and they're still getting new sculpts, separate sculpts for that setting. Now, the downside to these sculpts is that while they are beautiful and detailed and very dynamic, they are not made with ranking up in mind. They are quite large and they do not rank up well. People have done it, but the general consensus is if you want to rank up some of these new Warriors of Chaos units, you have to be very careful. They only rank up certain ways, and you probably will have to do some trimming of cloth, spikes, etc. to really get them to rank up side by side. That being said, it's just nice to have the option. Even if you just want to use some of these new sculpts occasionally for heroes, or if you want to make it work to rank side by side, you're going to have more options for unique sculpts than basically any other army in the old world. So not only do you have the new Warriors of Chaos sculpts, but the new Sigmarines, the new Stormcast Eternals, are basically Chaos Warriors for the side of good, and they make excellent kitbashing opportunities for Warriors of Chaos. It may seem counterintuitive, but they line up very well. You can make excellent heroes or rank and file models by kitbashing some of these Stormcast Eternals with some of your Warriors of Chaos bits. And if you don't believe me, just check out Ionis Cryptborn, one of GW's newest Stormcast heroes, and try to tell me he's not already 90% there to being a Chaos Sorcerer on Dragon. Yeah, you can't do it. And he's not the only one. And it's also safe to say that Stormcast Eternals and the Warriors of Chaos in Age of Sigmar will receive more sculpts more often than any army in the old world does. So if you build a Warriors of Chaos army for the old world, you're going to have a steady supply of new kitbashing options and modeling ideas that are going to come from a different game that fit super well into yours. Not to mention the insane amount of returning characters, existing characters, and now the production Chaos characters you can draw from. If a big part of this hobby for you is being creative and kitbashing new characters or making your own characters, I would strongly suggest you start looking at Warriors of Chaos because their opportunities are going to be almost endless. What I do think is going to disappoint people about the Warriors of Chaos, and that's if they come from Creative Assembly's Total War games or from previous editions of Warhammer Fantasy, is they're going to look a little different on the tabletop in how they play. Traditional ways of playing Warriors of Chaos are basically not large, but strong blocks of infantry with insane armor saves and with individual models that have multiple attacks. It made their infantry very deadly and very fun to play, to be honest with you. And that just doesn't vibe with the way the rules of the old world are set up. The Warriors of Chaos still have some of the strongest infantry in the game. I'm not saying they don't, but as a game setting, it's very much moved away from infantry blocks and favors cavalry, large monsters, and heroes. Take your rank and file Chaos Warrior, for example. In the previous edition, they had plate armor and 2 attacks per model. In this edition, they only have heavy armor despite still being insanely armored on the model and 1 attack apiece. And from a lore standpoint, this is probably disappointing to people because now their god-touched Warriors of Chaos, who's achieved so many great deeds that they've been blessed this amazing suit of armor, is really no better or no worse than heavy infantry from other factions. Instead, your powerful units in your Warriors of Chaos army are going to be your Dragon Ogres, who are some of the most insanely efficient units on the tabletop. And for your rank and file units, you're probably going to be looking at more Forsaken than you are Warriors of Chaos. And that's not to say the Warriors of Chaos are bad. I don't think they're great either. I think they're a very middle of the road faction, and I think for the most part, for most people, that's probably a good place to be. All I'm pointing out is that if you're trying to build a competitive list or a semi-competitive list, the army is probably going to look different than the one you have in your head, which is just something to think about before you commit money to putting this army onto the tabletop. One last thing I do want to touch on before I end this video is because the Warriors of Chaos are a supported faction, they are getting an arcane journal. And while these journals do have a little bit of lore, their main use is it always brings alternative ways to build and play your armies. And it's very exciting for Warriors of Chaos because it looks like they're going to get a Norska list. Now, obviously, the list hasn't dropped yet. I don't know of any influencer or YouTuber who has early access to this book, so I don't know how it plays or how it's going to work, but I do know that this is the first time a list has focused on just being Norska, so less Warriors of Chaos and more just normal angry Viking humans in a long time, and I think that's really neat. But in a more general sense, having this arcane journal will help you grow less bored of the army because you'll have different ways to play it. And if, and it's very likely, GW does end up doing narrative campaigns, there will likely be more army lists like this, and the Warriors of Chaos are likely to be featured often. So yeah, that's my spiel. If you're still on board, by all means go out there and get the Warriors of Chaos. GW is about to release a box set that will probably save you a lot of money. It's probably a great starting point. Overall, I think the Warriors of Chaos are in a good place for this setting, and I think they're going to be a great army for both beginners and veterans, and especially anyone who has creative drive, who really wants to dive in and make their own unique things. They just have a lot of options to play with. And if you are on a budget and only looking at supported factions, the Warriors of Chaos are going to be the cheapest army to put on the tabletop because their units are so elite and expensive. You can get a very functional army together at a low price point comparatively. And that's probably where I'm going to leave it. As always, thanks for watching.